Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers here to talk Seahawks football. We've got the 53-man roster established by the team set today, as well as the practice squad all figured out. And we're going to kind of talk about that, react to that news, and catch you up on anything else that's going on around the team. Welcome in, Keith. How you doing?
Doing good. Eventful couple of days with cut downs and all of that, and kind of looking around the league and seeing everything that's happened. And lots to talk about. Yeah.
What I thought we'd do is just make this a pretty quick show. There's a lot of reaction shows out there, a lot of news, but for our listeners, we just kind of want to do this really quick for all you guys. I thought we'd just go by position group. We can talk about the roster, and we can talk about the practice squad guys on each position group as well. That'll make it pretty easy. I'll start out with the quarterbacks, and then we can talk about a couple of notes. Geno Smith, Sam Howell on the active 53. They have not signed yet a quarterback to the practice squad, although they do have one single spot remaining on the practice squad to do so.
It was interesting that they announced 15 on a 16-man roster practice squad, but they don't have that third quarterback yet. Tells me they're trying to work something out, and because Walker was not it.
Yeah. Well, so John Snyder alluded to in a little press conference they just had half an hour ago or so that he could very well be back, but he didn't get into any specifics. So you're right. They're probably, either negotiating that or still talking, or they're talking to somebody else. One of the two. Running backs, Ken Walker, Zach Charbonnet, Kenny McIntosh. No surprises there, really. If you really paid attention during practices in the preseason, Kenny McIntosh kind of separated himself there from George Holani. George Holani did get cut, but he's part of the practice squad. Kobe Lewis, Kerry Robinson are gone.
I read a couple of things. They were like, oh my God, Holani was like, we thought Holani was a lock. Instead, they kept McIntosh. I'm like, then you weren't paying attention, because it was McIntosh that got all the reps with the starters and was always the first one. And Holani didn't play till McIntosh came out. So it should have told you from the beginning who was ahead in that competition. And I think people just wanted a good story.
Holani's a nice little player, and he's on our practice squad, and so if anything happens to Kenny McIntosh or one of the other backs, he's there. There's a lot of stories like this across the NFL, and backs like this are just kind of available. And so we've got a good one, and we'll see how that goes over time. Wide receiver room, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Njigba, Bobo, Chenault, and Derek Young. So basically, as we predicted, the roster would break down. That's the way it went. And then so they opted to keep six.
Got cut. That's the one. We knew Easop Winston Jr. would make it to the practice squad if they wanted him. Same with Cody White. So there wasn't a lot of reason to protect those guys. Eskridge was kind of the wild card, but nobody claimed him. So he, I don't know if he made it I didn't check his name, but he was. So
Easop Winston is on there, and Cody White.
So they didn't sign Eskridge.
Eskridge actually went to Miami's practice squad. So he cleared waivers, but then signed immediately to Miami's practice squad as soon as he could. And that's okay. He had a shot here. He had a shot for a long time. He had a shot this summer to separate himself. He didn't. And, there was a pretty stacked wide receiver room. I'll be completely honest. And it just was going to be an uphill battle for him all along. And it turned out that Aesop Winston probably separated himself a little bit compared to Eskridge. And, I think they probably would have had Eskridge back on the practice squad. Maybe not. Maybe that's what he heard. Maybe his agent figured that out right away. And he went elsewhere. So we'll see. But I'm not concerned about it. I think Aesop Winston and Cody White have just as much upside. Now, they might not have that return ability, but we've got Chenault already. And they decided to keep another player that we'll talk about in a little bit on the defensive side that actually really impacts that position. Tight end, they kept 4. Noah Fant, Farrell Brown, Brady Russell, and A.J. Barner, the draft pick that really didn't show out too much, but they didn't want to give up on that kid. And expose him to waivers, and so they kept him on the roster.
He didn't show out in the passing game, but he showed out fine in the running game, and that's his role. He was a blocker, and he blocked well. So I don't know. I guess I don't subscribe to he didn't show out well because he only had I think he only had 2 catches in the preseason, but he's not going to be there as a pass receiving option. He's there to be a blocker. He's Will Disley. 2.0.
Agreed. And the good news is Brady Russell made it. And there was nobody put on IR. So Noah Fant, Farrell Brown, no long-term injury concerns there. Even though they haven't been practicing, they didn't play the last couple of games. Should be good to go when the season starts. So that's good. Everyone else was cut except for Jack Westover, released on a injury settlement, and he's going to revert to IR. So he's going to be gone the entire season. Now, he's just got a little hamstring thing, but there's really no room on the roster for him this year anyway. And so by placing him on IR, the team keeps control, and he's just kind of, it's kind of sucky for him. But
because of he was injured and when cut, so therefore he gets the injury designation. The team actually doesn't have a choice. He automatically gets stuck on their IR, which means they have to pay him because he was hurt. If he gets healthy and wants to play, then they have to come to an injury settlement, and which will get him released so he can become a free agent. And then it depends on how much they pay him in that settlement, because the more they pay him, the longer he has to wait to come back to Seattle, but he can go to anywhere else right away.
Interesting. Okay. Offensive line, they decided to keep 11, which nobody predicted. In fact, some of the players that they kept, we didn't predict. So I'm going to kind of get into this with you a little bit, figure out exactly what they were thinking. Charles Cross, George Fant, Stone Forsythe made it. Anthony Bradford, Laken Tomlinson, Christian Haynes, Connor Williams, Oluwatimi. And then we had some upsets. Michael Jarrell made it. Now, he was a question mark. I had him on my roster. A few others did. Some didn't. So he was right there on the bubble. I liked the move that they decided to keep him. And then Satoa Lomea made the roster, which surprised most. Now, early on in an early prediction show, I predicted that he would make it, only because I thought, well, he's a high draft pick. They like him. He's got some upside, but then you really didn't hear too much about him in training camp. He wasn't really standing out. So I thought he was going to be cut. So the last couple of predictions that I made, he was off my roster. And then Jalen Sundell, a kid that came in as an undrafted rookie free agent as an offensive tackle, they decided to move him over to center, give him some reps there. And that's how he kind of made the roster. Now, are they going to keep 11?
Not long term.
It doesn't seem like it, Keith. This seems like kind of a roster maneuver situation for them that they sometimes do.
Sundell is on there because they're not sure when Connor Williams will be 100%. And so if Connor Williams can only play a few snaps or has to miss a week because he's still not quite ready to go with that knee, then Oluwatimi will start and Sundell will be the backup. That's really what that has to do with. Once they're confident in Connor Williams being 100%, so that Oluwatimi is nothing but a backup and not going to be on the field, my guess is that Sundell will be released, brought onto the practice squad, and they'll use that extra roster spot to fill in somewhere else, like maybe a fourth running back.
Yes. All of that. Yeah. Or swap Sundell for Abraham Lucas, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the offense. I counted 26 players, which means there's 24 on defense. Now, the times that we've done this roster evaluation prediction stuff, we've kind of ended up being even. So both of us kind of did not predict that they would keep 11 rostered linemen, which is very rare. So
especially with Lucas on the pup. See, well, a lot of times it was like 10 with Lucas on the active roster. Right. So that would be that would really be 9 since he's on the pup. 11 plus Lucas being on the pup is a lot. But as you said, the young players, Lumea, Sundell, and Gerald all made the roster. And there's been some, the speculation was that, maybe Gerald would make it, but instead all 3 did.
So we did end up signing Garrett Greenfield and Max Pritchard, who does not count against the practice squad total.
Mm-hmm.
He's got an exemption. And then Raquan O'Neal made it to the practice squad, and McClendon Curtis made it to the practice squad. Elam Manning is really the only guy in camp that ended up not making either the active roster or the practice squad out of all the offensive linemen they had going down the stretch there in camp, which is pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to the defense, Keith. Defensive tackle or defensive line in general, Jaron Reed, Byron Murphy, Jonathan Hankins make the active 53. Those choices were obvious. Cameron Young is on the PUP list. Buda Jones, Nathan Pickering are guys that were already on IR in camp, and I can't remember if they've settled with those guys or not. Mario Kendricks was cut, not signed to a practice squad, and then Kyron Bars, defensive tackle, was put on the practice squad.
And DeVere Levinson was also cut from that group.
Practice squad. Yeah. And Dre Jones, Leonard Williams, Miles Adams, and Mike Morris made the active 53.
Mm-hmm.
Any surprises there?
Miles Adams.
A little bit.
Is a surprise. It was more of a, then I look at the list of the people that they cut and I go, yeah, I don't see anyone that they would keep over him. He just never did anything.
We all decided that we were going to cut Miles Adams and keep a 6th cornerback, which is really kind of what we were trying to do. And he was kind of the odd man out on the defensive side of the ball. And at least most of the 53 prediction stuff that I was doing. And I think most people just kind of discounted Miles Adams, kind of left him off the roster most of the time, and then carried that 6th cornerback. And we'll talk about that in a second. Outside linebacker, edge rushers. Uchenna Nwasu did not go on IR, which is good news. Now, they've got 2 exemptions for IR this year for players where they don't have to miss the entire season. You can bring them back. He didn't go on that, though, which tells me that they expect him to be back within 4 weeks or sooner. And they did trade, though. So from the last time that we recorded to right now, they ended up trading for Tevis Gibson, an outside edge rusher guy, and they got Darrell Taylor off the team. They traded him. So we kind of predicted that. We didn't know who would come back and return. It ended up being Tevis Gibson. Now he kind of takes on that 4th guy rotation role that Taylor had. The upside with Tevis Gibson is that he's a bigger guy and he can set the edge. He's stronger and he's still got the speed. I like the upside with him, honestly. If you watch the tape, you listen to or read about what he's done in the last 3 or 4 years in the league. He's this is his 5th season. Now he hasn't had a huge impact, but he did when he first came in.
He had 7.5 sacks a couple of years ago.
Yeah. And then he moved around a little bit, got misused. He gave a little interview today at the BMAC and said that he was going to be used in a similar role that he had when he first came into the league, which is just getting to the quarterback.
Yeah. So, I mean, the trades basically, because they got a 6th round pick for Taylor, and they sent that exact same 6th round pick for Gibson. So basically you swap the 2 players, Taylor out, Gibson in,
I like it.
And Gibson is $2 million cheaper.
Yeah, that's a big issue.
I think has more upside in this defense. I think Darrell Taylor has more upside, period, but in a 4-3, not in a 3-4.
Here's the deal with Darrell Taylor. Now, this current regime didn't have any loyalty to him, didn't draft him. They reworked his contract. Now, he if he made the team, he was going to make some money. But if he was cut, he didn't have any, there was no downside. He had $20,000 or something guaranteed. So I think basically what they get in Gibson is a player that they feel like fits their system better, fits their culture better, a player that shows up every day, a good practice player, a consistent guy. And that's what I'm hearing about him. I think
Gibson is definitely a better scheme fit. I mean, Darrell Taylor was always kind of a fish out of water once Seahawks moved to a 3-4.
Yeah.
Because he's not an outside linebacker. He's a defensive end, but he's not big enough to play a defensive end in a 3-4. He's a 4-3 defensive end. And honestly, I'm surprised it took him this long to trade. And I wish they'd traded him earlier and gotten more for him. But Gibson is a good, he's not only is he cheaper, but he in this scheme, he's a better player.
Listen, I would have taken that swap. Darrell Taylor for Gibson. I think I would have done that trade if it was a straight trade. Now, they didn't work it that way, but that's basically the way it worked out. I would be okay with that, and I'm okay with the way it turned out. Nelson Caesar, Sonny Anderson, those guys were cut and not brought back onto the practice squad. The Seahawks did some interesting business, though. They did bring a guy in that we're familiar with in Tariq Smith. I don't know if you've heard that, but it's not on the official list yet because it hasn't yet been signed. He's not signed it yet, but it's been confirmed by Adam Schefter and Pelissero that he, in fact, is coming onto the practice squad. Now, Tariq Smith was a 2022 5th-round pick, I think, out of Ohio State that ended up getting hurt, didn't have an impact in his first rookie camp, came back the next year and just kind of washed out a little bit and ended up getting cut the second year, correct? And then I think he went to Arizona and stayed on their practice squad for the balance of the year, came into their camp this year and then was cut again. And that's where he's been. And now we've brought him back. New regime, no relationship with him really. Now, it could have been a John Schneider move to bring him back in. But I'm sure they've, coaches talked to other coaches and they figured that maybe he deserves another shot at this spot. So we'll see. I
mean, he's a guy that there was a moment where he looked really promising. And that was in his rookie year. And there was like an explosiveness there. And we were like, there looks like there could be something, but then he got hurt. And you're right. He didn't make any kind of an impact because he was hurt all year. And then last year just didn't make the team. There wasn't really a spot for him simply because they already had, 4 guys at that position, ahead of him. So he ended up not making the team. And, he went to Arizona and I don't think he actually played, but he was with them the whole year. Jamie Sheriff, got cut. And he actually got claimed off waivers. He is on the Carolina Panthers 53-man roster.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, I think they were really trying to get him back onto the practice squad. I heard that from a couple different sources. He immediately took off though and got signed to an active roster, which they plan on using him. Now, we're going to get to the inside linebacker spot right now. John Radigan was also cut along with a few other guys. John Radigan was also claimed by the Carolina Panthers. 2 players that Seattle cut had waiver claims, and both to the Carolina Panthers. And both of them basically are, now under head coach Canales, who's familiar with both of them, their work ethic, all that kind of stuff. And it's a good deal for them.
I mean, you're in a situation there where, they don't get to choose that. It's the other team puts in a claim, and they were awarded them because they're the highest spot in the claim order to put in a claim. So they go there. But both of those guys came in, played well in the preseason, did some stuff, and didn't make the roster. And part of it it shows you the talent above them, but it also just points to, like, if they weren't going to make the roster when they, like, I think Radigan led the team in tackles in the preseason. If that wasn't enough for him, to make the roster, then he probably wasn't. He was done in Seattle. So it's good to see him get a chance to, go make another roster.
Yeah, absolutely. And have a rotational role on the active 53, plus, basically be one of their best special teams players on that roster. Continuing on the inside linebackers on this team, Terrell Dodson, Jerome Baker, Tyrese Knight, and Drake Thomas make the active 53. Eason Gibbs, Blake Lynch, Patrick O'Connell, Michael Barrett, in addition to John Radigan, get cut. Now, they brought back Patrick O'Connell and Michael Barrett, the guy we just traded for, onto the practice squad, which is good, because I would have felt kind of even worse if we trade for this guy and we just completely missed. But that's good that he's on the practice squad. We get a little chance to now look and see what he's all about. Drake Thomas is the interesting story here. Now, in addition to Dodson and Baker being well enough not to be on IR or anything like that, which is great news. But Drake Thomas just got activated, like, off the PUP list 2 weeks ago. I don't even recall seeing him play in the last game. I think he did have a few snaps, but obviously the team likes the upside situation. Now, this is, again, an inherited player. They didn't draft him. They didn't have anything to do with him. They didn't pick him off the practice squad last year. They don't know, So again, he's made quite an impression in the offseason to get another shot.
Well, athletically, he's a superior player to Radigan and O'Connell, who are really the guys that he was competing with. So there's just a lot more promise and a lot more upside. And he's a little undersized, but the team really liked him. And for them to cut the steady veteran for Thomas just shows how much they like him. The Michael Barrett, like him getting cut, doesn't bother me as much, because it wasn't when they traded Michael Jackson. It was not to acquire Michael Barrett. Yeah. They traded Michael Jackson to get his guaranteed money off the books.
I heard from Canales today that the intent is to start Michael Jackson at cornerback number 2 on their roster.
Yeah. And
which is great for him.
It's great for him. And honestly, like, he was a starter in Seattle a couple of years ago, and he got pushed down because Seattle's got some really damn good corners. But he's a good enough player. He should be playing, but he wasn't going to make this roster simply because they have their top end and they want the bottom end to be filled with, younger developmental guys at the position. And so if he's not going to make the roster, they needed to get his guaranteed money off the books and hand the guarantee parts to another team. So otherwise they were going to have to eat that, and they didn't want to do that. So I think that had much more to do with Michael Jackson than it did actually acquiring Michael Barrett.
So we keep 4 linebackers on the roster, 2 on the practice squad. Safeties, they keep 4 safeties. Rashawn Jenkins, Julian Love, Kayvon Wallace, and Kobe Bryant, who we thought maybe on the bubble. Turns out his position was pretty solid. Tyokota, Marquise Blair, cut, but on the practice squad. And then Jarek Reed is on the PUP list. What do you think about the safety room?
No surprises.
Yeah. Okay, so corner is a little surprising, but not terribly surprising if you're paying attention. Tariq Woolen, Devin Witherspoon, Trey Brown, Nehemiah Pritchett. And then it gets interesting. Artie Burns got hurt, and then he was cut. And then the team's going to just play a little bit of a game with him as far as getting him on the active roster eventually. So he's cut. He's on the practice squad. I think they're going to wait until after the first. They're going to bring him up off the practice squad, according to reports, to be active on game day in week 1. And then they will sign him to the 53 after week 1, where his contract is no longer guaranteed.
Yeah. So as a veteran player, if he is on the roster, like on the 53-man roster on Tuesday after week 1, his contract becomes, or maybe it's Monday after week 1. His contract would become guaranteed for the year as a vet. So they wait till Tuesday in order to sign him. So that way, if something happens down the road, they decide to, make some changes, they're not stuck with his contract. So it just gives them some flexibility. I think the one thing that out of all this position group, Artie Burns not making it meant they only kept 5, and one of them was Williams, who's kind of a project.
Yeah,
and they
talk about that.
They cut DJ James.
Yes, which we predicted.
Yeah. But then he had a better week 3 than weeks 1 and 2. And so there was some talk, well, maybe he can get on as that last one, but he wasn't, if they're only keeping 5, he wasn't going to make it. And they didn't sign him to the practice squad.
Wow. And they're still looking for a quarterback.
Quarterback. Yeah. I'm surprised they didn't sign him to the practice squad, given that he was a draft pick. Clearly, he did not.
We'll listen for his name to find out if he's on somebody else's practice squad. Now, that wouldn't surprise me. No, it wouldn't surprise me at all if it was the 49ers or the Rams or the Cardinals practice squads, because they could start to get some information about Mike McDonald's defense. So look for that. Now,
let's talk about D. Williams. I do not see a news report of DJ James signing with anyone.
Yeah, we'll see. Just keep that in mind, especially if he goes unsigned for a while. He's just kind of floating out there. Week before we play those teams, look for him to sign with one of those players or with one of those teams. D. Williams is the big story, I think, out of all of this. And that here's a guy that came out of nowhere, signed late in camp, right? Like the day before camp.
It wasn't. Yeah, it was before camp, but it was late in the process.
Yeah, and so the guy comes in. He's playing wide receiver. Doesn't work out. He's not getting any reps. He's not even getting any reps. Like they just went to him and just said, "Listen, dude, you've got some defensive back experience in your background. So why don't we switch sides and see what happens? We like you on special teams. You're a good returner. We're going to give you some opportunities there, but let's see what happens on defense." So the kid plays himself onto the roster by being their number 1 punt and kick returner, in addition to Laviska Shenault, and makes this team. What a great story.
He made the team for more than just special teams. I think it's good.
And some upside, but they don't want him on the they don't want him to take snaps on defense.
It's easy to be like, oh, he made it because because he has the special team stuff, and some upside. But
that's why he made it.
Go look at his tape. Like, he positioned himself in coverage really well. In the first game, as soon as he came on, they went after him. They threw like 4 straight passes at him, and they went 0 for 4. All great coverage. Like, he covered his way onto this roster too. And you're right. They don't want him on the field right away. But he played well enough. Let's not
get over our skis, Keith. He did that against 2nd, 3rd, 4th string guys, not against the premier wide receivers in the NFL.
Which is why they don't want him on the field as a defensive player yet, because he's not ready. He's still a developmental project.
He looked great. But he needed to do, and the reps that he had, he did the best he could with what he was given. Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
okay,
but I don't want him on the field. Like if he's on the field, crap has like hit the fan.
Let's word this slightly different. He was better in his reps than DJ James was on defense. He also has all that special teams value, but he was a better cover guy than DJ James. That's why he's on the roster. Because you're right. Was he a guy that I want on the field against ones? No, not yet.
That's why it would be very interesting to me. That's why I think that they don't change that room composition when Artie Burns comes back. I think they end up with 6 corners when Artie Burns returns because D. Williams isn't going anywhere. And they'll figure it out somewhere else, whether that's Miles Adams, like we predicted, or they pull one of those offensive linemen off the roster like Jalen Sundell and put him on the practice squad and get Artie Burns on the roster. I think that's what happens. That's my prediction.
Yeah.
So, okay. So is this roster like what you envisioned in the offseason as far as the finished product and heading into the regular season? How do you feel about it?
It's younger than I envisioned because of the Artie Burns and Michael Jackson not making it. And what happened at linebacker and some of that. So there's some extra youth that kind of isn't what we envisioned, and offensive line too, but overall it's really what we expected. I mean, it's the same guys, plus Connor Williams. And then, other guys that weren't really expected, like Drake Thomas, but he's on the back end of the roster. He's a special teams guy. And so the difference between, do you keep Radigan or Thomas? Well, you know what? Thomas costs about $2.5 million less. So we probably should have predicted Thomas over Radigan, but we put Radigan on there just because he's a known quantity. But overall, there's not a lot of surprises.
Yeah.
There really isn't.
Yeah. No, I think they did a great job overall. I mean, take a look at quarterback. I think, Geno Smith was always their guy, but the acquisition of Sam Howell to replace Locke, I think, is an upgrade there. The solidification of Kenny McIntosh in that third spot. And we didn't see Kenny all last year. Didn't even really know what we had. Now we know, and we kind of like it. And I like that upside a little better than DJ Dallas. So I think that's just a slight upgrade for me.
You should like it a lot more than DJ Dallas, I thought.
Well, I do, but I'm trying not to be too excited. I want to see him in the regular season. Preseason's fine, but if Kenny McIntosh can get reps in the regular season and still look really pretty decent and contribute and can pass pro, on board for sure. Jake Bobo's kind of solidifying that spot early in camp. I thought was kind of an early camp story where he just kind of took the reins of that number 4 spot and wasn't going to let it go to a new regime. That's really important. Laviska Shenault kind of solidifying that room, I thought, and Derek Young making that over all the other prospects that really did very well for themselves, like Winston and White. And then the tight ends, I'm just kind of blah on. I think we're a great blocking tight end room, but not so much upside on the athleticism. We'll see how that plays out in the year if it really matters.
If ever gets healthy and gets on the field, then there's some definite talent there, but he's got to be healthy. So
I think in the offensive line room, I think the Abe Lucas story has been big and disappointing. To be completely honest, I think the early predictions in June were that he was going to be back on time and go through camp and be ready, and we were going to have that. Didn't happen that way. Now, who knows really?
There was never a ready for camp prediction. It was ready for week 1. And that's true. That was he was never going to be ready for the day 1 of camp. Like that was never. But as time went on,
we knew that even that was going to be a stretch, and it turned out it was. Now, John Flannery did say something today.
I think there was a setback in the middle in there. Something tweaked and had a little setback. And so the timeline got extended. So instead of being ready for week 1, he's going to be ready for weeks 3, week 4, somewhere, in that range. And they just go, you know what? There's no rush. Forget it.
And that was reiterated today.
You're already on the pup. We can put you on the regular season pup, give you a whole nother month after the season starts and not have to deal with any kind of rushed timetable or anything like that. And just wait it out. I think once there was a little setback in the middle of training camp, it just became, we're going to do it this way. And so there was never any attempt to like see if he's ready to get on the field or anything like that. They knew what the story was.
Yeah. And Schneider essentially said all of that at a press conference today, said that there's no rush. We expect him to play this year, but there's no rush right now. And we'll see how it goes. But Charles Cross, George Fant then takes that right tackle spot. George Fant always had that from the beginning of camp and never let it go. Never was really challenged, even though McClendon Curtis got tons and tons and tons of reps. McClendon Curtis didn't even make the team after he showed them that he was really versatile, could play 4 different offensive line spots.
The problem was that he could play 4 different offensive line spots, but couldn't play the tackle spots competently. Right. And that's really where he was trying to make the team. I go back to when they had like mini camps and whatever. Everyone made a big deal about McClendon Curtis getting reps with the ones, and because other guys were hurt and sitting out and that kind of stuff. And God, that never should have been a story. Like, no one should have cared then. And the fact that he didn't even make the roster, like, shows how much that is a non-story it was.
So we still don't know who the right guard is officially that's going to start the season as the number 1 right guard, the starter. Christian Haynes or Anthony Bradford. I think it's going to be Christian Haynes.
I think it'll be Anthony Bradford.
We'll see how that goes. Laken Tomlinson. Michael Jarrell was a big story, I think. A guy that was an afterthought as far as a draft pick, comes in. Everyone's saying, well, he's not ready. But he's got some nice upside. Ends up making the roster and really kind of being ahead of schedule as far as being NFL ready. And I think they're excited about him potentially being able to take over there on the right side in case Abe Lucas can't make it past this season for whatever reason.
The guy didn't give up a pressure in the preseason.
Wow.
Okay.
Did not know that.
There was not that many snaps. I think it was 42 overall pass blocking snaps, which is more than you're going to see in an NFL game. So while it's not a lot in terms of 3 games, it is a sample size big enough for you to say, okay, that's in an NFL game. He did not give up a pressure. Now, 3rd and 4th string guys, because he was mostly playing at the end of games, but that meant he was in position. He had his body in the right place. He didn't get off balance. Because even 3rd and 4th string guys can take advantage if you do that. And he didn't. So that proves that his technique is, it's there. Now it's can he put all the things together and play with at the speed of the starters? I don't expect him to be at that point now, but he's the 4th tackle because they kept Stone Forsythe. Forsythe is the swing tackle going into the first few weeks. Whether he remains the swing tackle or whether Jarrell unseats him on that as that primary backup at some point this year, we'll see what happens. But he's the 4th tackle, which is a great spot for him given where he came from and how far he had to go. He made tremendous strides. And then Lomea is sitting there as well. That they just didn't want to expose, I think, to a roster cut. And then they signed Connor Williams. Now, that was a huge thing. I think that's going to pay huge dividends. Nobody's seen Connor, so nobody's really talking about it and how exciting that is. But when he shows up week 1 and solidifies that center position that we've struggled with for a lot of years, there's going to be a lot of happy fans when they start seeing the results of him being in there. Now, Oluwatimi just never took the reins, had every opportunity in the world to come in and really solidify his spot as the offensive center in this team and just couldn't do it. On the defensive side, I'm just slightly a little concerned about the defensive tackle spot. Now, we've got Jaron Reed and Byron Murphy. I'm not talking about those guys. I'm talking about the nose tackle. Jonathan Hankins is sitting there, but really, he's the only guy of his body type and girth on this roster right now. Gotel got hurt. He's on IR. And Cameron Young just is still on the pup. He's still not ready to go. And you going into camp, you expected one of those 2 guys to be a backup and make the roster. But neither of them are healthy enough to play football. So they're going in with one nose tackle, and their backup nose tackle is probably Jerron Reed.
Right. Yes. Right. And, some of the other guys can slide around. Leonard Williams slide, these guys will slide, and that's scheme diversity for you, but there's nobody really stout enough to really take on double teams and stop the run. Now, we saw Byron Murphy do that. He's slightly out of position doing that, but he might be so good at it that it doesn't matter. But I want to see it in regular season first.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll feel really good about it. Outside linebackers, we kind of talked about that when we were going through the roster. I really like that room. I think they're gonna generate a lot of push between that defensive line we just talked about and the outside guys. Inside, I still think it's a question mark as to whether Jerome Baker and Dodson can stay healthy. I feel more secure about Dodson being on the field all the time, but Baker, I don't know. We'll find out. He was dinged up all camp. Mm-hmm. And came in hurt and really hasn't spent a lot of time inside the defense yet. And so Tyrese Knight has got way more snaps in this defense than Baker. And so I think right out of the gate, Tyrese Knight takes significant snaps at that spot, but there may not be huge amounts of snaps available anyway, depending on how many defensive backs are on the field. And that's really going to come down to like Kayvon Wallace. In essence, I think Rashawn Jenkins and Julian Love at safety, they're going to be your starters, but Kayvon Wallace is going to be there consistently.
Kobe
Bryant's available.
Played really well in camp in the preseason.
Yeah. And who would you rather have on the field? Jerome Baker or Kayvon Wallace? At this point, I don't know.
Well, I'd rather have Kayvon Wallace because I know I'm confident he knows the defense. Baker just didn't practice. He's a talent. He's good. Yeah. He's a guy that. If he knows the scheme and all of that, like he's talent, he's an upgrade, like he's a legit player, but he hasn't practiced. Like this is a brand new scheme to him and he hasn't practiced. So, I mean, are the film room sessions enough?
Yeah. It's not an indictment against Baker. It's just the fact. It is what it is. We'll see how that plays out. There's a couple weeks between now and the regular season start, so we'll find out. Kobe Bryant making the roster. I was happy for the kid, honestly. Full time in this position with a new coaching regime, kind of played himself into the situation where they couldn't cut him. He had offered too much diversity and played well. Outplayed Ty Okota, and Ty had a great camp. And good for him. I found it interesting.
Blair had good preseason games, and apparently,
I found it interesting that Marquise Blair got signed to the practice squad. Honestly, I was like, wow, interesting. They really like him.
Well, I mean, he was a guy that at one point was a starter. He was going to be the dude, and then, I think he tore an Achilles tendon, and that was the end of his season, and the end of his career in Seattle initially, because after that he was gone. But yeah, he was the guy they always thought was going to be a big deal. And then, that was like 4 years ago. It seems like, God, has it really been that long? But it has. He looks like he might be finally healthy. So that's good. And if he is, and he can at some point get back to the talent level and really the play that we saw when he was a younger guy, that's a huge asset to have sitting there on your practice squad.
The cool thing that I saw in the preseason with the safety room was how aggressive they were, like jumping routes, tackling, just being, there was a level of confidence there that I didn't see last year. Julian Love had that, at the end of the year, but I think this year they're starting with that. And there's something about this scheme, the way they play, the way they trust where everyone else is going to be. It just seems like it's working right out of the gate. I want to see it in the regular season for sure, but there's something about this defense, Keith, that is going to be something special. I think that the level of communication that they have, the competence level is increased. The putting players in a position to be successful is at another level. that we've seen, in the last 5-6 years. Right. And then
so
you take a
being
look at
better than that's a low bar to get over. But
that's very true. But then you take a look at the cornerback room, you add that to the safeties, and then the inside linebackers, dropping back into coverage. That back end of the defense is the strength of this team, even though the strength should be the defensive line, because those guys are amazing as well. They had such a great preseason, I thought. But I think the back end of this roster, not the back end like the last 3 or 4 players on the roster, the back end as far as the cornerbacks and safety room on this roster are elite level. Like Tariq Woolen looked amazing. And if he can play anywhere close to his rookie season, even last year, it wasn't horrible, but he was on a very bad defense and he played poorly as well. But the early signs are very promising. And then Witherspoon being kind of the athlete and moving around all over the place.
Looks so good.
And Trey Brown is very confident right now. It's going to be special. And which leads me to my next point is like our next show is going to be the prediction show. And this roster composition has me very, very excited about this season. And I'm looking at the schedule and I'm looking at some different things as far as how the schedule looks. And I'm just like, I'm going to have a hard time being reasonable. Like people are going to think I'm crazy when I come out with my predictions.
It has nothing to do with predictions. Don't give anything away. Make sure people come back for the next show. I will say that I looked up some stats on when the Seahawks had primarily their starters. They never really had all their starters on defense. Except for I think there was 4 series, 2 in the first game and 2 in the second. 2 in the first game, 2 in the third, and that was it. When they had, and they wasn't even all their starters. It was just
like 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out.
Yep. They did not give up a first down. There were 12 plays for 14 yards.
Wow.
Was the overall stat line
that might be why I'm excited. That might be why.
That if you're going to be excited, that should be the reason why.
I didn't know that, but that's what it felt like. It just felt dominant. Now, you got to just take it for what it is. It's early. It's preseason. But when you've been around a long time, and by my gray hair, I've been around for a while. You know what things are supposed to do, what things should look like, what things look like in the preseason, how that translates and so forth. I'm just telling you, this defense is going to be something special. And I think that it's going to be,
looks like it's going to be good.
To like top 10, not halfway through the season or at the end of the year. This thing's going to be top 10, like right out of the chute. And I think that's going to end up winning us some games that we normally would have not predicted that we'd win, and could surprise a few teams early in this process.
Well, it helps that they start out against 2 really bad football teams.
Can't take anything for granted.
True. I'm just saying that you want to look good as a defense in your first 2 weeks, facing a rookie quarterback that doesn't have an offensive line in front of him. And
they sure are excited about him in Denver.
And Daniel Jones is going to help you look good. They should be excited about him in Denver. He's looked really
talking about
confident.
Bo Nix.
Yeah. Bo Nix has looked really good. He's looked confident. It was such a perfect fit. Sean Payton's offense and Bo Nix's skill set, such a perfect combination. It just made too much sense.
Yeah. I think long term, I think that works out for them. And that's great. Yeah, this will be fun. It was a good show. I really enjoyed reviewing the roster stuff. We've been kind of, building up to this moment for a long time, and wanted to make sure that we got this show out and had a chance to talk about this stuff. So until next time, You can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Find us on your favorite podcast platforms, our own YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment, whether you like it or not. That would be great. So until next time,
Go
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.